Megan, and this week we're going to be talking about content management systems. So, I know there might be a few opinions that you might have already on this topic. So, first of all, if you're a developer, you might think that that's a rather boring topic and rather basic, and I'll talk about why that isn't the case here now in a second. And also, if you've never heard of a CMS or content management system, I'll also explain what it is in a minute, and it's actually far more important than it may sound. Just from the name, it sounds very corporate, which, obviously a lot of companies do use them, but they're actually really important and can actually be a really big benefit as well. So I know myself as a developer, a lot of the time you'll get caught up in the actual code of the application, the performance metrics, latest frameworks, etc., etc., etc. So talking about something like a content management system might seem like kind of a step towards, back towards the basics. The thing is though, a content management system is crucial even when you are using a modern framework like SvelteKit, for example, Next.js, whatever you're using. A content management system is still really integral to how your app works and how nice it is for other people to use. So, if you don't know what a CMS, or as I said, content management system actually is, well, essentially what it lets you do is to create, manage, and modify content without direct code access. So, essentially what this means is that it's a user-friendly application that sits between the website's code and people who read the content on it. So, it essentially acts as an easier kind of interface for people who maybe aren't developers to be able to modify or add or remove any content on the website. That way they don't have to modify the HTML or Markdown files. They have a visual editor that will let them add text, images, videos, forms, things like that. So, for example, you may have heard of content management systems such as WordPress, Drupal, Contentful. There's honestly a lot of different ones. There are probably hundreds at this point. Some of them do different things. Some of them are a little bit kind of more complicated. Some of them are very simple. There's a big range of content management systems out there, but essentially what they let you do is, as the name kind of says, manage the content of your website, whether it's a blog, an e-commerce store, or whatever it might be. There are some more what's called monolithic CMSs, for example, like WordPress and Drupal. But more recently, we've seen the rise of more modern API-first CMSs, which are also known as headless CMSs, such as Contentful and Sanity, which I've actually been checking out recently, and so far I quite like Sanity, but, yet to be seen whether or not I'll stick with that long term. An interesting statistic here is that WordPress powers over 40% of the world's web content, which is a really big deal. Given the fact that WordPress, I said, powers over 40% of all websites on the internet, really kind of speaks volumes about the fundamental need for content management and how important that is. So now, as I mentioned, there's been a kind of rise in the popularity of headless CMSs, which are really important for modern web development, especially if you're building, for example, a SvelteKit application. You would really benefit from a headless CMS. So essentially what this means is that you're decoupling the content repository from the front-end presentation. So that means that you can build the front end exactly how you want with SvelteKit, for example, which is what I generally use, while still providing a robust content management backend. So that way you can have a modern front end. You're not kind of stuck with WordPress and all of its problems and all of its design decisions. And if you want to start using custom themes, some of those cost money and you have to have plugins and blah, 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 blah. You can have your own custom front end if you want. You can use a framework. You can use whatever you want. It literally does not matter because it is completely decoupled from the back end, at least the content management side of things, which makes a really big difference. And it means, let's say in a couple of years' time, you want to switch to a new CMS. You can just switch to a new CMS. And generally they'll have migration tools that will let you just import your data, but your website will still look the exact same, function the exact same. You'll just have a better CMS. And the same goes if you want to change your front end. It is completely independent from your content. So you can still keep all the exact same content and just change the actual front end of your website. So it's very beneficial for multiple reasons. So if you personally haven't used a CMS, or if you're a bit unsure about using a CMS, I'll give you a few reasons why it's really important. So, for example, even just time saving for content updates. So it means that instead of developers having to manage the content of the website, clients can manage that directly, which will obviously save the developers a lot of time. So let's say, for example, a client needs to update a phone number or add a new team member bio. Well, without a CMS, that's going to require code changes, a build, and a deploy, right? Which takes up developer time. With a CMS, though, a client can often do this in minutes without involving us at all. So it means the development team can keep on working on whatever they need to work on, and the client is able to update the content by themselves. This means that we've freed up developer time for complex features and optimizations. And generally, it will also mean that it will cost less for the client as well. A CMS will also help ensure brand guidelines, for example, and just general content consistency. So a well-configured CMS will allow for the definition of content structures and formats, meaning that all content adheres to brand guidelines. For example, the tone, style, and even image sizes. So it means you can be using the same font sizes, font families, etc., and maybe even the same layout. So this means that you'll be able to use things like reusable content blocks and media libraries. So let's say for a new staff member, let's say each staff member has their own little card on a page. Well, you would have that saved as a content block. It might be called employee card. So then when you want to add a new one to the website, you just go onto your CMS, you go find your content cards, your employee cards, you click add, and it will just give you some fields that you need to fill out. It might be something like title, name, bio, image, and it will automatically style all that for you, make it all look nice, and display it just like the other ones so that everything is consistent and on brand. It also means that, for example, things like calls to action or contact information can be updated in one place and reflected across the entire site. It also means a media library would be available, so for things like, business logos or icons, or things like product images, are available as well. It also means that your websites are generally more scalable. As the website will grow, the amount of content can explode. A robust content management system means that it will manage this efficiently, often with built-in search engine optimization tools, without requiring us to re-architect the whole front end. So this could mean, for example, for a blog, you could write the code once and never have to touch it again. And people can just keep adding blog post after blog post after blog post. They could have 10,000 blog posts if they want, but the code that you wrote 5 years ago is still the exact same. And I'm not saying you'll never need to change it. You won't need to go update stuff, make things better, do security updates and patches. But the actual functional code itself could stay the exact same for years and years and years, even though the user, or client could keep publishing things over and over and over. So generally, these content management systems will also offer powerful APIs, whether it's using GraphQL or REST. This means that the content isn't locked in to just that particular website. It can be easily accessed or displayed on things like mobile apps, digital signage, or any future platforms as well, meaning that the CMS and your content will be far more adaptable. That way, if you decide a couple months down the road, actually, this is doing really well, I want to have an app, well, next thing you know, your app is built and all your content is already there, because all you have to do is just write the code to display the content, and because the content is already there, it's already being managed by the CMS, so it takes a lot less time, it's a lot more efficient, and there's far less duplication as well. Obviously, this also leads to empowerment for the client and ownership of their own content. So obviously they have increased control over the actual content of their website. they can make more timely updates. They're not solely reliant on us for every single change. It also kind of gives them more of a sense of ownership and kind of agility for their actual content. For example, if they want a picture updated on their homepage or even just some wording, they can just go and do it. They don't have to ask for, the developer to do it or ask their opinion and blah, 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 blah. Oh, could you remove this photo? Could you add this photo? Oh, can you change this phone number? Could you change this email address? It's just done, there's no kind of going back and forth or anything like that. They don't have to wait around for the developer to actually do it, build the app, deploy the app, etc. It's just immediately done and it's immediately live for the visitors to see. One thing that a lot of CMSs don't really consider, though, is accessibility. So on my search for a CMS, obviously I really consider accessibility. As I mentioned, I've been looking into Sanity CMS, which so far has seemed mostly accessible. There are honestly a few unlabeled buttons and things like that, which I'm actually considering contacting them about, but I'm a pretty big fan of the CMS overall. So when I say the accessibility of the CMS, generally the content that it sends will be accessible, because you have to remember, you're the one actually creating the front end for it to be displayed in. They're not necessarily sending code, they're just sending content. So it's technically still up to the developer to make the front end of the application accessible. I'm more so talking about the actual user interface that you use to edit the content. So for example, you might have a drop down that lets you select what type of content you want to insert, or you might have a text box where you can type in your content and you can decide whether you want it in bold or italics or whatever it is. All these things need to be labeled, they need to be the correct kind of HTML elements, etc. So far, as I said, Sanity does seem pretty accessible, besides one or two smaller issues, but I think it's literally just 2 unlabeled buttons is all I found. And honestly, I don't know what they are currently, but they don't seem super important because I haven't needed to press them. So I suppose that's at least good that it's not, the create button or the save button or anything like that. It doesn't seem like. As I said, the actual front end itself is still managed by you, so you can make it accessible very easily, and honestly there's no real excuse to. Whereas with WordPress, there were numerous accessibility issues that I would find on WordPress websites, which is part of the reason why I really do not like those sort of monolithic CMSs where you didn't have any options. You were kind of just stuck in that ecosystem. Another thing that a CMS will allow you to do that you actually can't really do if you're just asking a developer to update your website actually, is to have 2 different versions or more of your content. So for example, you could have a public version and a private version, and you could then move bits of content between this. So for example, let's say you're writing an announcement blog post, but it's scheduled, for, let's say May 1st, just because it's, almost the end of April now. But you obviously don't want that to be posted until May 1st. Well, you can schedule that to be posted on May 1st, or you can have it in your private content, and then you can move it over when it's actually time to be displayed, or you can move it over, when it gets approval from somebody, whatever way you need to manage it. That's the thing. There's a lot of flexibility here. Generally, they have different roles. So you could have somebody who's allowed to write content, somebody who's allowed to publish content, etc. And you can really kind of have this whole team of people dedicated to making the content, which is obviously super useful and really helpful for actually being able to create and edit content on the website in the first place. So just a quick recap here, a content management system essentially lets you to create, manage, and modify any content on a website. And it's really important to know about this, especially now, because previously the old options, you didn't really get to have any options. If you picked a content management system, you had to build your whole website around that content management system. And a lot of them were actually coupled in with website builders. For example, that's kind of how WordPress worked, where it would also help you build your pages of your website. And that was kind of fine, but there are huge problems with that. If your content management system stops working tomorrow because the company went out of business, well then you are done for, and you have to build a whole new website from scratch. You've lost all your data because you can't move it anywhere, etc. But now with headless CMSs, generally what will happen is your content is stored in something like a Postgres database, and you can move it around whenever you feel like it. If you need to move to a new CMS, you can do that. If you need to move to a new front end, you can do that. You're kind of really limitless in the options you can have. You also couldn't really take your data from your WordPress website and turn it into an app. But again, with a headless CMS, you can. And that's why it's called headless, because it is essentially without a front end. So you have the back end, and then you can do whatever you want for the front end. If you want to use a website builder, some headless CMSs actually do still support their own kind of website builders. But even if you want to use a different one, you could totally do that. If you're a developer, you can build your own front end. If you have a team of developers, etc., 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 you have a lot more options, which is really great because it means it's a lot more customizable and it will work for a lot more people. As I also mentioned earlier, it means generally solutions can be more accessible because you're not tied into this ecosystem where the components aren't made by you, you have no control over them, and if they're not accessible, they're not accessible. So it means that you're kind of limiting access to your website and your content, which is not good, obviously. The more people see it, the better, so why would you want to limit access to it? I said it can also decrease maintenance costs and things like that for clients because it means that you're not asking developers to make content updates, which is obviously really fantastic. For example, if you have if you have a set amount of hours or a set amount of content updates a month that developers will do, well, now you don't have to worry about that because you don't have to get the developers to do that in the first place. So, if you need 50 content updates in a month, it doesn't matter because you can just go and do them yourself. You don't have to end up paying extra because you need to pay developers to go ahead and edit that content for you. That is going to be just about it for this episode of the Envisiontech podcast. So I hope you learned something useful today about CMS. And hopefully, if you aren't using one, this will make you at least consider giving one a go because they are really useful, they can save you a lot of time, and they have become a lot better in recent years. As always, this has been the Envisiontech podcast. I'm your host, Paul Gagan, and we will have another episode next week. See you then.